One foot in the door, the other foot in the gutter.
These guys are just full of debauchery and disrespect, and they're just kind of assholes.
And he said, it's as if Yoko married Ringo. That was the funniest fucking line in the entire book. Welcome to Rock and Roll Book Club, where we discuss books by and about musicians and the music business. I'm Dave, and on this episode, me and my co-hosts, Shelley and Jen, are taking a deep dive into the land of 10,000 lakes. That's Minnesota, by the way. Because this month, we're reading Trouble Boys, the true story of the Replacements by writer Bob Mehr. The book is, without a doubt, the most comprehensive look ever into the cantankerous, critically acclaimed, hard-living, heavy-drinking rock and roll band, The Replacements. The Replacements emerged from the same Twin Cities music scene that spawned Prince, Husker Du, Soul Asylum, and The Time, and helped to define the music of the 1980s and beyond. The book tells the wild and often heartbreaking tale of a band that sought to change the trajectory of their difficult lives through music. Their uncompromising nature challenged music industry norms, but their self-destructive behavior created numerous roadblocks to their commercial success. Most often, the influence of the Replacements can be seen and heard in bands that emerged after their breakup in 1991. Friends, you may want to crack open a beer or 10 while watching this episode. You'll understand once you start watching. Thanks, as always, for joining us at Rock and Roll Book Club. It's me, your friend Dave, with your other friends Shelley and Jen. We're here for Rock and Roll Book Club. This month's book is a doozy, Trouble Boys, the true story of the Replacements, from writer Bob Mehr. This is the first book that we've done since we started doing the book club. I think this is number 9, where it's not a autobiography, it's not a memoir. This was quite a deep dive into this band.
I have a request, Dave.
Sure, absolutely.
Could you hold up the book again and just show how thick it is?
And how long it is.
There we go. Go. This is the deepest of deepest dives.
Oops. Yeah, this was it's a 20-hour listen or so if you include the epilogue, if you're doing it on the audiobook. This was my second time reading it. I did read this when it came out, the hardcover, when it came out in 2016. But for the purposes of this, for the book club, for rereading it, I listened to it this time on the audiobook. Little bit of the history on the Replacements. They formed in about 1980 in Minneapolis. They ended in 1991. July 4th, 1991 was the band's final show, just about 2 months before the entire music world changed with Nirvana, Nevermind, and bands like The Replacements were all of a sudden looked on in a more fond light. They missed out on that. They broke up 2 months before. They are one of the most notorious rock bands in history, largely for not only for great music, of course, but for personal behavior. They are known as a drinking band, somewhat notorious for their excess in drinking. There was a point in their career in about 1984 or so where you show up at a Replacements gig and you don't even know if they're going to play any of their own songs or if they're even going to get through a song. Are they just going to do drunken half covers and then get into a wrestling fight and then the show is over? Or, you just didn't know. It was so completely unheard of. But people loved the songs of Paul Westerberg, the primary writer. The OG lineup was Paul Westerberg, guitar and vocals, Tommy Stinson, bass and vocals, Bob Stinson, lead guitar, and Chris Mars, drums. That lineup lasted through about 1986. Then they brought in another guitar player after Bob was out. That lineup lasted till about 1990. When Chris Mars was out, they got another drummer for the last few months. They're considered pioneers in the world of alternative music. And so much of what they did, the music that they made in 85, 86, 87, 88, was the blueprint for what came into the 90s. They weren't the only ones, but they were a big part of it. They're part of a Twin Cities legacy that brought you Prince and The Time, as well as Husker Du, and a lot of other legendary artists. That was all brewing in the same time in the late 70s, early 80s in the Twin Cities. such a fantastic time for music.
Yeah, I have to say I had zero knowledge of the Replacements, which I will get into later. I feel ashamed. Yeah, no, I had no knowledge whatsoever. And I think my greatest joy in reading this book was listening to your playlist that you sent. And
by the way, linked below. We'll be linking it below. I called it The Replacements, a tight 40. I picked my 40 favorite recordings and put them into a playlist, Spotify, Apple. It'll be down below.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Don't miss it.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically my knowledge was zero. Other than that, I know that they're your favorite or one of your top favorite bands, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, on my other channel, The Dark Stuff, I've done a number of Replacements videos. I kind of feel like it's what I've become known for to a certain degree. I have a whole playlist. I'll link that too, if you feel like watching some other Replacement stuff. But yeah, they have been an enduring part of my life, going all the way back to probably 1986 or 87 or so when I first heard of them. Definitely.
I love the Replacements, and I was introduced to him in high school. I remember we were in Graham's basement getting fake IDs, and we were listening to Skyway and Alex Chilton over and over and over. Now, to get to know them through this book and how deep it went, like, I'm kind of mad at them. And then I'm like, stupid freaking fucks. And then I'm listening to your playlist. I'm like, but they're so good. Like, they're just good. Everything. So, it's a very thick situation. These guys are just full of debauchery and disrespect, and they're just kind of assholes. But at the end of the day, they're so good. So,
and I think that's what it was, the love of that music and the fact that people just like those songs so much that they overlooked so much negativity with that band, and nobody would put up with their kind of behavior and the shenanigans and the disrespect and just how sometimes just cruel they were to people. And people put up with it because they loved the music so much, and they were just so in love with the band, all the way from their manager who discovered them, who put up with a ton of abuse. And just because it was like he was in love with the band and he just couldn't say no. Origins, okay, in the late 70s, they had a 12-year-old bass player with Tommy Stinson who joined the band because his older brother kind of forced him to, bribing him with, he said, cokes and candy bars and such. Chris Mars was a neighborhood friend, and he started playing the drums with them. Paul Westerberg came into the picture when he could hear them while he was walking down the street. He heard them play. It was kind of intriguing. Ultimately, he winds his way into the band. Now, one of the first chapters is titled "Dead, Jail, or Janitor." Okay. And this was based on a comment that Paul Westerberg made in an early interview where he said, if these guys didn't have the Replacements to be in, if they didn't have a band, their life was simply going to be one of three options. They were going to be dead, they were going to be in jail, or they were going to wind up a janitor. And so I thought we'd try this with some of the members, sort of like the F, Marry, Kill kind of a deal, and say, what do you think these guys would have actually become if the Replacements had formed?
So dead is obvious. Bob Stinson.
Right, would have been Bob.
I think the janitor, I'm just going to go with the OG janitor with Paul Westerberg. And jail, honestly, I don't know about that one. Maybe Chris for wearing his clown costume everywhere. I don't know. They might have thought he was John Wayne Gacy. I'm not sure. Yeah, those are my three.
Okay.
I can go next. So yeah, Bob, definitely dead, unfortunately. Jail, I'm going to go with Paul. And Janitor, Tommy. And yeah, Chris gets a pass because he became an artist.
I think he would have been an artist anyways.
I think so too.
I agree with you on that.
Absolutely.
Mine would be dead would be Bob, unfortunately. Jail would have been Tommy because he was on the road to being a juvenile delinquent. And if music hadn't saved him, he probably would have gone down the same route that his brother did, who was also saved by music to a very real degree. Janitor would obviously be Paul because he already was, and he seemed resigned to not want to use his brain or not want people to think he was smart. And Chris would get a pass, because Chris did have the art going for him and probably would have had, even without the replacements, I think that talent would have been realized more fully. Maybe he would have gone to art school. Maybe he would have gone a more traditional route in the art world. Who knows? But either way, I think he had a solid out from that life. Whereas I don't think Paul, Tommy, or Chris, or Paul, Tommy, or Bob actually did. Alcohol affected them from their very, very first performance. If you remember, they were called the Impediments at the time, and they got booked at a teen dance that was a sober dance, and alcohol and drugs were not permitted, and they got kicked out and barred from playing because they were drinking outside in the parking lot, and they got caught. So from their very, very first performance, alcohol has been a part of their story. Without the alcohol, without all that notoriety, would we know the Replacements today?
It's such a part of their identity. Would they have? I can't even answer that. I don't know.
It's like impossible to say.
I'll answer it.
Okay, what would you like to say, Jen?
I have a lot of thoughts about this book. I think you have 4 people that have had really difficult upbringings, and they're all getting together. They're numbing their pain, especially the Stinsons, and they're just numbing everything they can, and they're partying, and they're starting to get successful. So I think the alcohol was a huge part of their success, because it's kind of, in many ways, in addition to the music being so fucking good, it got them notoriety, and in maybe not in the most positive way, but it's absolutely part of them. And, I was thinking, would they be better without it? I don't know. Dave, that's probably one for you because you know everything.
I mean, it's hard. This is a real hard one because on the one hand, the drinking and their excesses and all of the extreme behavior that they participated in did help them rise up the ladder to an extent where they got a national reputation based on that. They leapfrogged ahead of other bands, and it wasn't just because of the music. Like we say, their music was fantastic, but there are a lot of fantastic bands that are just boring and they have nothing to them and nobody cares. But then later, as was the second half of their career, that alcohol and that reputation became a clear albatross around their neck because Paul Westerberg clearly wanted to get away from that and be taken more seriously as an artist and really make a play for the mainstream. But they just couldn't because the fans wanted to pull them back down to the way that they were. And they just didn't have enough fight in them to push beyond that. The Replacements have transcended because they have a story to tell. There's the myth of them, the wildness, the craziness, the drunkenness, the cover songs, all of that stuff. And that's why there's able to write a book this thick about this band. And I hate to say alcohol is a big part of it, but it absolutely is. It's undeniable.
I think there's a lyric that perfectly summarizes the Replacements, and that is one foot in the door, the other foot in the gutter. I might not be getting that exactly right.
That's right.
But I mean, that's the band.
Right.
They felt like R.E.M. played the game and were able to somehow succeed in the music business, not solely on merit, but because they were willing to make certain compromises that the Replacements just weren't. Now, I certainly have a different take on that. R.E.M.'s a different type of band, but not only that, being nice to people is not exactly playing the game or doing something out of the ordinary. When a record company person says, "Hey, I like your music," rather than spitting beer at them or being an asshole to them, just saying,
Tying them
"Hey,
up,
thanks, man. Appreciate it. I like that you like the band or whatever." That's what REM did. They just
Yeah,
weren't
like
assholes to everybody.
basic respect would have helped the Replacements a lot.
But I
Right.
feel like they just looked for conflict. Bob Mould, REM, like these, like they wanted a rivalry. They wanted, an enemy, so to speak. Like they
The funniest
wanted
thing, yeah, the funniest thing
to
about
have
those
that.
rivalries is, in their very, very early days, they did have a legit rivalry with Husker Du. I don't think it was, I think it was a friendly rivalry. They were both local bands. They were both up and comers. They were very different.
They're
The
totally
Replacements
different.
came
Yeah,
on the
that
scene.
makes sense.
Right. And the Replacements came on the scene and they became the darlings. And Husker Du had a chip on their shoulder about that. They were pissed. They thought, we're more serious. We're better. Why don't you pay attention to us? They're just drunken idiots. And what about us? And eventually they moved on and they had their own career. And that was a real rivalry. The rivalry with REM, I don't think was legitimate because REM didn't feel the same way. They had no rivalry in reverse. They just existed. They loved the Replacements. They took them out on tour. Peter Buck plays on a track on Let It Be. They did not see a rivalry there. The real issue was the Replacements were jealous of REM's career and the way things were going for them. And they couldn't see it beyond, well, people just that they were somehow getting over on people and there was just something about them that was wrong and that the Replacements were getting screwed somehow.
I don't know if either of you have read a book about REM. I have not, but
I have not, no.
I would guess that there is probably no mention of the Replacements in it.
Probably not. No.
You know?
We probably should read an REM. If anyone has a good REM book, let
Yeah,
us
we'll
know,
take a
right?
suggestion on that one.
Yeah, I would love a suggestion.
And
Yeah.
it is just straight up jealousy, in my opinion. Not jealousy of their
Yeah.
music. I mean, I think the Replacements music, I like it better. I mean, I love REM. They're one of my favorites too. But ultimately, I identify much more with that sort of lovable loser thing that the Replacements have going on than REM, which is more high art and a little bit, you never know what Michael Stipe's really singing about. A real thing about the jealousy with REM flared up when the Replacements manager, Peter Jesperson, agreed to go out on tour with REM as their tour manager. That caused ripples throughout the band that kept going for years after that. It wasn't
Yeah, it
fair.
was like he had betrayed them,
Right. He said,
And
he
when
said
he
something
did
like,
that, it was like one foot in with REM, the other in the coffin.
yeah.
Well,
he said
like that just screwed him.
He said Peter left us for the prettier girl. Like that was what Westerberg described it as. Like they got ditched. And Peter Jesperson, by the way, their manager, who we haven't really mentioned yet, who discovered them, and he's a big part of the story too, took a job with REM because he wanted to learn more about the business because they did things very professionally. And he even said, look, it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun like with the Replacements where you're partying and it's crazy and stuff. He's like, I was like basically an accountant.
And also the thing about it is I don't know if it's all of the Replacements, but it seemed like Paul Westerberg was very like just us, us, us. It's like there's no consideration for Pete Jesperson wanting to learn things or grow his career or anything. It was just like you screwed us, end of story.
Right.
Well, I think a lot of Jesperson's problem, in addition to many, is the Replacements were his bad boyfriend. I mean, he tried to get away to go to like the better boyfriend who's going to give you stability, probably a better income, maybe,
not treat you like shit, not abuse you.
Some jewelry. Yeah, and just will love you. And
Yes.
he's like, well, I'm going back to the bad boyfriend who gets drunk, forgets to call, doesn't pick me up,
But isn't great in bed.
They were so high maintenance. And maybe that led to a thing of like, oh, when our guy who is helping us with our high maintenance lifestyle, who does every single thing for us, disappears for a little bit, rather than try to adjust and try to do things on their own, they were like, fuck that guy. How could he ditch us for these REM losers? Screw them.
And think of everything that Jesperson had to do. Like, you look at, in addition to him probably tarnishing his own reputation, like, oh God, I'm sorry, guys, these assholes are, like having to do that after every single meeting and the damaging PR he had to do. I mean, I wonder if people are like, God, Jesperson's really got some talent. He could really do some great things with some great bands and be treated well and make a ton of money and not have to deal with all this bullshit. Paul's like, nope.
He was in love with the Replacements, and
yes,
that
he was.
his objectivity was out the window. One of the things that I loved about the book and that I learned as a huge fan going in was so much about Bob Stinson and really the tragedy of Bob and what was the core reason why he was so troubled, because he had this reputation of being wild. Yeah, sometimes he plays naked, sometimes he wears a dress on stage, he's drunk, sometimes he's not there on time, he shows up 10 minutes late or whatever. And everybody had a million Bob stories, and they were sometimes hysterical, sometimes they were sad, sometimes they were just like, man, that's rock and roll, I mean, it's like, you don't know. And what we learn in this book is there is a reason why he would act out the way that he did. And there was an underlying thing to, he wasn't just crazy for craziness's sake. Like, he did have this history where he was abused sexually as a child, and that manifested itself when he was older in being sent to like reform school and all of these different programs to try to get him to walk the straight and narrow. The big revelation for me was really the tragedy of Bob Stinson, which I already thought was a tragedy just based on what I knew. But finding out what the origins are of it, the cause, was just a big part of it. And it shapes my view on Bob, my view on whether he should have been fired, all sorts of things. It really did change my view on what happened with the Replacements in the 80s.
I think, as I said, these guys came together. They were all in pain. From what we've learned, obviously, it's like The Crew, but it's not, because these guys were really good. But I will say it just, I mean, what do? You're in that much pain. You're getting abused by your half brother's dad. I mean, this is bad shit, you guys. And it's really sad. And, I just think he never had anything in him to make it through because he started using at such a young age and he started doing everything at such a young age.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just, as talented as he was and as amazing as this band was, every time this guy tried, he failed. Every time. He went to rehab a couple of times, right?
Yeah. He was court ordered mostly for his thing.
Well, okay. And, after that, you look at his child. He had a child that was
severely handicapped and
special needs. He had something really
cerebral
bad.
palsy.
Cerebral palsy.
Yeah, cerebral palsy.
But it was like,
as I said, summer brain.
But it was like a really severe form where
he couldn't communicate, he couldn't
communicate
talk,
or use his limbs, right? Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was very severe.
Terrible.
It was very severe.
Carlene, she's trying to take care of her child and herself,
and then also her son.
Yeah, exactly. And her other son, Bob. But I just sadly don't think that he had the stamina or the ability to get through anything.
Well, and on top of that, it's revealed later that he was dealing with mental illness as well. And so, between the sexual, emotional, and physical abuse he faced as a child and his mental illness, he had to self-medicate. And it's just so sad that someone with such talent, it just honestly, it felt like he never had a chance because all of that was hidden. No one knew, he didn't even have a chance to like work through it or address it properly because of the time and because that's just like not what happened. And it makes me wonder, if someone could have intervened in Bob's life that truly cared, that could understand his problems and try to help him rather than just sending him off to boarding school or sending him off to rehab, how that would have changed the trajectory of his life.
Yeah, no, it's a good question because, again, based off what you know as a fan of the band, well, Bob is this wild guy, but even if you say, well, he's an alcoholic, a drug addict, in the mentality of the 80s, I don't think people thought, oh, what's happening there is he's masking some trauma or some pain, or that's
Right.
why he's doing what he's doing. They just thought this guy's crazy. He's wild,
Right.
and because most of the time it was pretty entertaining, as long as you didn't have to deal with the after effects. The later on when he's nuts and he's breaking shit and he's going through all of it, you only saw him for the 90 minutes on stage where he was extremely entertaining. And yeah, it's funny that he's wearing a tutu on stage and that he does these things, but nobody thought to look any further than that. It just wasn't part of the mentality of the 80s. That's, is just a basic fact. People didn't care. They saw alcoholics and drug addicts as weak, that it's a weakness
Right.
on their part, or it was something that you just denied. I don't have a problem, like kind of like Westerberg's dad. He was a functioning alcoholic. He didn't drink until he got home from work. He would wake up in the morning, drink his coffee, go to work. When he comes back, immediately hits the bottle. Like that's kind of the way a lot of people were back then. And they didn't think of that as being like an alcoholic
Right.
because you're functioning. You're still holding down a job. You're not drunk all day. You have it kind of controlled. And I think that was largely the mentality. And that's why people just didn't think that about Bob, you know?
Sad.
Yeah. One thing I love about Bob's guitar playing is, they have these like insanely catchy songs and and melodic, and then all of a sudden Bob will just throw in like this kind of chaotic like guitar chord where it's like na, 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 and
Yeah.
you're like, whoa, where'd that come from, and I feel like that it just felt so Bob, where it's like you can try to go along and along and along and live quote unquote normally, but there's always going to be this element of chaos there, and it comes out in his playing.
Bob was such a big part of the sound that there was a definite distinction between the first half of their career where he was
Yeah.
there and the second half when he wasn't. They were just completely different entities. And some of what people loved about Bob and what people, loved about those early days was, like we said, that the sweet smell that you adore, I think we'd rather smother. Paul wanted to move on. Westerberg wanted to move on from that and be taken more seriously. Bob really didn't. He liked that
Yeah.
idea of being the big fish in the small pond. He wanted to be a big local band, play at the 7th Street entry, and still keep his job and be a regular guy just in a cool band. And that
Yeah.
wasn't enough for the rest of those guys. Like Paul, Tommy, and Chris had decided after a certain point that we don't have any other options. Like, this is it. Like, let's do this band for real.
Yeah.
And Bob just didn't want to. And whether that was, again, manifest some of his mental illness or some of his personal problems were blocking him from really realizing that he could do this or something. I mean, I don't know, but he was just never interested, and he stopped being a real member of the band at a certain point because he just wouldn't participate.
I wish they would have talked to him about it, instead of just being like, this is ridiculous, you're out. Like, hey, here's what we need to see from you, or you're out. Like, I just feel like they didn't really give him a fighting chance to stay in. And I don't know that he would have succeeded even if they had, but it felt really sad that he just didn't have a chance.
Well, and it fractured so many relationships, like with him and his brother. Like that's just, it's awful.
Mhm.
Poor Anita, the mom.
Yeah, and then Tommy
Oh,
said Christmas was never the same because his family blamed him. blame Tommy. How could you
Yeah.
fire your brother? You know?
But I don't see them as a band that would sit down and communicate about anything. So I
Yeah,
don't
they're
think they
not.
had it in them. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
Bob became the scapegoat for their excesses and their behavior. And the idea that he was fired because he was the most fucked up member of the most fucked up band in the world. And he was too much for them. When it really, looking back, it wasn't so much that they were on a different trajectory. The replacements, at least Paul Westerberg especially, had decided, and Tommy, they wanted to go for it. They wanted to try and make it, you know, and Bob just didn't have it in him. He wasn't interested in that.
Yeah.
And so whether it would have been over his behavior or whether it would have been over something else, they were on different paths. Paul, I think, understood that Bob was a central part of the replacements. And that's why, remember when they had the meeting to decide about what to do with Bob, Paul said, I'm going to quit the band. I'm out.
Yeah.
I can't be with Bob anymore. I'm done. And then it was Paul and Chris were like, well, who are you going to have play drums? Who are you going to have play bass? And they wanted to stay with him. And that made the decision. Okay, I guess we'll move on. But I think that it showed that Westerberg understood getting rid of Bob was going to definitely change the nature of the replacements. And maybe they wouldn't really be the replacements anymore without him. Could the replacements have actually handled commercial success if it had worked out for them the way that they wanted with Pleased to Meet Me or Don't Tell a Soul or whatever, and it had actually worked? Could they have even handled that? I mean,
well, they didn't want it. I mean, so I think they would have sabotaged themselves if they got it.
Well, they said they wanted it. That was the thing. They kept saying, oh, we're going to try. We're doing it on this record. You know, we're going to make our big record. And then it just didn't happen.
I just think they would have sabotaged it. I really do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they did.
I don't believe them.
They did sabotage it. I mean, we have the answer. That's
SNL, Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
Saturday Night Live, which was unintentional sabotage. I mean, I don't think he did say, come on, fucker on live TV. And if you watch the video, he does back off from the mic and is like clearly yelling to Bob, like not to try to get it on mic, like, hey, I just swore on national television. And they were even unaware that they did it. I mean, that it got picked up on the microphone, because if you remember in the book, they're talking about after the first song, they thought it went really well. And they were like all high-fiving each other, like, man, that was awesome or whatever, until Lorne Michaels comes barreling into their dressing room to be like, what in the hell did you guys just do? You know, you just maybe ended SNL by doing that. They were unaware that they even did it.
They're like, oh, Lorne, that's so mild. You have no idea.
Nothing to the Belushi days.
That is nothing. Yeah.
But you guys, I don't know. I felt like they were getting their big break. In SNL, I mean, I don't know. And they just fucked it up. They fuck everything up.
They fuck really everything up.
Well, I would say the one period where they did legitimately try was Don't Tell a Soul. And that was the one where they started the album with one producer and then they moved to a different producer because it wasn't working out. They knew they were under the gun of Warner Brothers is not going to keep shoveling out $250,000 for them to make a record if they don't sell any albums. They had to do it. There was also that professional jealousy with R.E.M. where the R.E.M. had a platinum record in 1987 with Document, and the replacements were still, you know, selling at just a couple 100,000, which is not nothing. You know, like those are good numbers, but I mean, they're not R.E.M. numbers. And even when they did try, they were met with resistance. I think that made them stop and being like, nah, fuck it. We don't care. You know, we'll just kind of be the same replacements we always were. And then bitch at everybody else for why they're not succeeding.
Yeah.
Because they never looked inward. They never looked inward as to why is this shit not happening the way we want it to. They would just look to who can we fire because it's obviously somebody else's problem. And it was obviously Paul and Tommy or whatever. They just were not constitutionally made for music success at the way the 80s demanded it, with music videos and slick records and being nice to radio people and record company executives and all of that stuff, that the game that was played in the 80s. It's different now.
Ladies and gentlemen, the replacement.
I want to go back to Saturday Night Live for a second.
Okay.
And I'm going to give a shameless, like a shameless plug to Paramount, and I'm not being paid to endorse them, but I will. If anyone wants
Although
to.
we would accept,
Yeah, we'd
payment
accept it,
from
you know.
them.
Would love
obviously.
endorsements. If you get Paramount and you go back, they have every Saturday Night Live that ever aired, ever. And it's awesome. My husband and I watch it all the time. Like, you can see anything. So, you know, you've got Harry Dean Stanton, and they were doing drugs with him, you know, in the green room. I mean, it's just total debauchery. Like, you see him introducing them. And I think the way they used to do it is that they play early on and then they play later. Honestly, just Google it, find it on YouTube, see this performance. It's just like, come on, guys.
Oh, see,
Like,
I love it. I love it. I think it's my favorite SNL performance because
it's a disaster. It's a mess.
I know, but it was so them, and they didn't change anything about themselves to do it. They were largely an underground band. I mean, they got on as a favor. Remember, it's supposed to be the Pointer Sisters, and the Pointer Sisters couldn't make it, and so they put the replacements in, which is crazy. The replacements
Slightly different show.
were the replacement for the Pointer Sisters. They came on, and that was just that kind of rawness didn't work with the mainstream audiences until maybe 1992 or 93, when they come on and they're with their hair all spiked up and they're wearing the crazy clothes that they wore. And that
Bob's wearing a dress.
Right. And Bob's wearing a dress. And I love how they changed. Paul and Chris and Tommy like swapped clothes between songs. So they're wearing each other's stuff, but nobody swapped with Bob. He's still wearing the same thing. Which
I love all of that.
Yeah.
But the performance is shit. But that's
I loved it. I loved it. And it was just so raw. And yeah, Paul did step away from the mic a couple of times when he should have been singing. But if you listen to Replacement's live recordings, he did that all the time, you know? So it was literally just the same as if you see them in a club or what they were like. And so for me, that's perfection. I love that. I also love a little tiny element of a train wreck in a live performance. It's just, for me, that's what's so endearing. That's what I love about them. So when I watch that performance, like, that to me is perfection. And there's so few video recordings with Bob. There's a lot of audio, but the band was so anti-video that there's just not a lot of video with Bob in there. And just seeing Bob, and this was just a few months before he was fired.
I totally respect that. I felt like with these guys, like, I'm like, where's your drive? Where's your, they didn't have it. They were just drunks. I mean, they did have a little drive here and there, but I mean, I would have been like, we're going on SNL. We're going to freaking kill it. And then we're going to keep going and going. And then we're going to make tons of freaking money. Paul, I mean, everyone will get the help that they need. You know, Jesperson can go enjoy time away and we'll go from there. But, you know, I get it. I get that. And I love an arty performance. Do not get me wrong. Like, that's the Replacements. This is why I'm a mainstream fan, because I like the organization.
I mean, the SNL performance truly encapsulates the Replacements. It's another example of like, this is them.
Right.
Yes.
You know,
absolutely.
Opportunity, fuck it up, have fun, be crazy. I mean, it's all.
But it also shows that in 1986, the world was simply not ready for a band like that. Like, so music critics were, and people who would take the time to listen to the records were like, wow, this is some amazing shit. But for people who just get something from seeing a performance on SNL, or for just listening to mainstream radio, top 40 radio, whatever, that was not what they wanted to see. They wanted a more slick presentation. They wanted guys who looked not like they just woke up, or they had been passed out and they just were revived or whatever a few minutes ago, and that they were wearing these crazy clothes. And, you know, I mean, people weren't ready for that.
It makes you wonder, you know, if they would have started 10 years later, what would have happened? Would they have been the Nirvana? You know, would they have been bitching about Nirvana being the Rivalry? You know, just because their behavior and their attitude and style would have been so much more accepted. You know, maybe
if
maybe they could have like kept both feet in the gutter and still been stars.
They could have
because,
gone on tour with the crew. Can you imagine?
Oh my
Like,
God.
that would be, oh,
Every city would burn.
they had a chance meeting. They were looking for a producer, and they met with a guy, Scott Litt, who became R.E.M's producer, who had multiple huge records with R.E.M. And they treated him like an asshole. They taped him to the chair. They, spun him around. They did all this crazy stuff to him. And the guy was like, I want nothing to do with them. And they did that to multiple people, producers, record company people, they got so caught up in it, but other people who were not like in love with them were just like, get the fuck away from me. And, so I think a lot of it was, that kind of wildness turned people on and turned the industry off.
Yeah, I don't know if it was that same producer, and this isn't even the wildest thing or the most career killing, but it stands out in my mind where they were partying with this potential producer and it was 1 a.m. Oh, it was somebody from a label. They were going to sign with a label and they said, okay, call the head of the label. And if you do that, then we'll sign with you. And the dude's like, I'm not fucking doing that. And they're like, all right, well then like, why don't you just take off all your clothes? I think it was take off all your clothes and walk around the bar. And he was like, no. And then they're like, all right, last chance, walk around and cluck like a chicken. And the guy was like, listen, man, I love your music. I want to sign you. I think you guys are great, but beyond all that, I have self-respect and I'm not going to do it. And they didn't sign with them. And that was it. And it's just like, and it's all for a joke. It's all for a prank. It's all to push someone as far as they can. Like, and I can't help but feel like if every story like that, I felt like, God, if that music industry person would have just understood who they were and they started the behavior, like if they would have fucked with them first, it would have been a wild success. It was like if they could have just beaten them at their own game, like don't fucking take it seriously, show up drunk, fucking give them, bottles of booze and fucking party and like spit at them and slap them around. And they would have been like, oh my God, we're so in love.
Yeah, absolutely. They did not want commercial success. I'm telling you, these guys didn't freaking want it. They didn't care enough to get it, and they didn't care enough to keep it if they got it.
Well, they wanted it to be given to them.
Right. They didn't want to have to work for it, ask for it, be nice to people who would contribute to it, because it's what they didn't seem to understand was it's never just the band and the record. There's a team of people that work in addition to it, that a lot of promoters and, radio promoters and all the staffers at the label and all that. And if you treat them like shit all the time, it's just human nature that they're not going to want to try as hard with your stuff as with the other guy who was really nice to me when we went to a party with the band and they were super nice to me. Whereas, Paul Westerberg poured beer over my head and called me, tried to make me pluck like a chicken and cluck like a chicken, do all this stuff.
Tommy spits in his hand and says, nice to meet me, to a record exec.
Right. They're funny stories in the abstract. Like they did have a lot of very they're like clever, stupid, like in a way, like sometimes they did, when you hear them recount the stories, you can't help but laugh sometimes. But at the same time, you're like, God, they're so self-sabotaging. Like, as much some people could love that band and then you have that negative interaction with them and it just makes you not want to try as hard.
Surprise, surprise. Business is about relationships, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will tell you, just the disrespect, and given their talent and how many people would have killed to even get as far as they got to play in a freaking garage at a sober party. I mean, these guys they didn't give a shit. And that's frustrating. And I believe if they weren't so good, they wouldn't have gone anywhere. They'd all be still sitting in the CC club.
Yeah, they would
No,
still be at the
doing
CC
shots
Club.
at Jack. I mean, come on. Yeah, these guys frustrated me, but they're
No,
so good.
They're
yeah,
so good. I don't know if it was right or wrong, but the part of it that kills me is the loyalty. It's like, this is the guy that gave you guys your start. Where's your loyalty to that? And I'm not saying that they did the wrong thing. I mean, it reminds me of Dave Grohl being like, "Hey, I got to do what's right for my music career." I get that,
yeah.
but also it just made me sad that they seem to not acknowledge all that he'd actually done for them.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have mattered if they did or they didn't. They'd always end up back together because the replacements are bad boyfriends. I'm breaking up with
True.
you. Oh, wait, here's some champagne and some flowers. Oh, wait. Yeah. I mean, he's just going to go back every time. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
He was so important to the band in the early days and the development
Appreciate it.
of he did everything for them. He gave them every opportunity. He was such an ear for them whenever Paul would bring over a tape of songs and all of this, and he would be the ultimate encouragement, and he was just their advocate. And as soon as they didn't necessarily need his advocacy, yeah, they just ditched him. I understood Paul's explanation because what he said was that he was really upset with the way things were going and he just wants to start punching people and he doesn't want Peter Jesperson to be in the way of those punches.
Yeah.
So,
And that was a kind way of doing it.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Of just saying, that's what it is. It's not about you. It's just about the circumstances. And I don't want you to feel responsible. However, from his perspective, he did get dumped by the girl that he loves. They cut him loose and it was a pretty harsh way to do it. And Tommy was sort of like mocking him and making jokes. And like I said, he did have a problem with that for years after the fact. They mended fences, of course, but so ultimately, I think it's like kind of what Jen said, like it wouldn't have made any difference to their ultimate career, like whether he was there or not.
You know what? Jesperson's girlfriend that dumped him is an honorary survivor of the book. She does not win my award, but she is an honorary member.
I struggled with this a lot. And so I actually have two lists.
Okay.
And so one list is in terms of like artistry, like who's my favorite in terms of like their talent. And then also like ranking them in terms of like the type of person they are. Okay.
Okay.
So in terms of artistry, this was tough. I mean, this was tough too, but Paul, I just think he's an amazing songwriter. Bob and Tommy, it was hard. I went kind of back and forth, but Bob dragged Tommy into this and taught him how to play. So Bob wins. Then Tommy, then Chris. And I feel bad saying that Chris is at the bottom of the list because, I don't think he's a bad musician or anything. I think he's great. I just feel bad the way that Paul Westerberg talked about him and how his skills were limited. And Chris was ready to just like get fired up and break new ground. And he never got the chance because he got canned.
Yeah.
So I feel like if he hadn't gotten let go, maybe he would have shown us more. In terms of, the quality of person that they were and ranking them as people. So number one, I'm going to go R.E.M. I'm kidding. Sort of. So yeah, Chris was at the top. He was my favorite. I just felt like, I don't know. I mean, he had some shithole moments, but he just seemed like he could have been an actual like nice and good person.
Yeah, except for the times when he turned into Pappy the Clown. We didn't address that. His alter ego,
Gacy.
Pappy the Clown, when he would go crazy and just become, he had his moments too, but for the most part, he seemed like a decent guy.
But also, like, I felt like he had to do that just to stay in the band, because it's like they're like, I don't want these guys to think I'm like the lame-o. I got to do something nuts too just to keep up. I don't know.
Poor little lamb. He's the lamb.
He's the lamb. He's the lamb. We need to, yeah. I want to hear when it's your turn, Jen, your lamb and your wolf. I think. Okay, so then after that, I'm gonna say Bob, and I know that might be surprising because he did so many fucked up things, but I just have a lot of empathy for his situation, and I feel like he tried the best he could given the circumstances that he had. And was he, a model citizen? Fuck no, he was not. But my empathy puts him in second. Tommy would have gotten second, except for when they fired Pete Jesperson. If you'll recall, Paul and Tommy were in the room, and Pete walks in, and Tommy had a shit-eating grin on his face. And that was the moment, like, up until then, I was like, oh, he's just this, like, kid who's, like, super talented, and, like, holy shit, he's just, like, in this whirlwind of whatever, and he's having fun, and he's charismatic, and he's bouncing around on stage. But then when that moment happened, I was like, that's such a dick move. Like, that's just such a shitty thing to do to someone who's done so much for you, is to have, like, some sort of joy in knowing what's about to happen.
Yeah.
That made me really turn on Tommy.
It was lame, but in his defense, I mean, not to defend him, but he was like maybe 18 years old at the time.
Well, yes, of course.
So it's like,
yeah,
he lived a lot of life by the time he was 18. He was in the
True.
band at 12, but at this point, he was still very, very young and pretty immature.
True.
So it could almost be understood, like, Paul at least tried to smooth the blow, but yeah, you're right. Tommy was just a dick that day.
Yeah. And then Paul is last, which it also pains me to say that, because there's so much I do like about him, but I think it's just the level to which he was so self-centered, and the level to which, I don't know, I feel like he drove a lot of the madness in the band, which, to be fair, was that, great or bad? We don't know. But in all of his firing rampages and just his inability to kind of see beyond himself was tough for me.
Yep. All right, Jen.
I'm pretty much in agreement with everything that Shelley just said. I just, poor Chris, just trying to go along, trying to keep his head up. Tommy and the grin was terrible. It just made me sick. Poor Bob. At the end of the day, I'm gonna say my favorite, sadly, was Paul, because he's so good.
I know, that's the thing.
So good. And
that's why I did 2 lists.
Well, and I know, and I will tell you, Love Untold, which is his solo.
One of his solo songs. Yeah, great song.
That's like probably maybe my top 10 favorite songs of all time.
If I had to separate it out the way Shelley did, I would probably have Chris Mars at number 1 based on his personal behavior and everything. And if I tracked in what they did after the replacements, Chris and Tommy would be very high up, because I actually think they've done a lot of amazing stuff. But if we're strictly talking the time in the band, my favorite is Paul, just because he is the source of all of the songs. And there's no replacements without Paul Westerberg.
Yep.
His words, his voice, his attitude, as negative as it can be, he's the reason why ultimately the people love his songs so much that they're willing to put up with all of his bullshit and all of his shitty behavior and the way he treated people, which, by the way, I experienced personally. I don't know if you guys watched that video that I sent to you. I'll link to it below. I did have an experience with Paul that was pretty negative back in 1989. So I saw that firsthand. I know exactly how it is. But Paul's still my favorite. I would then say Tommy, and then Bob, and then Chris. And I don't like putting Chris at the bottom, but that's just Chris as drummer, not knowing what I know about him now, meaning I have all his solo albums. I love them. He's a brilliant artist. I did in the 90s inquire about buying one of his paintings. They were already tens of thousands of dollars even back then. So he's a very
Aw.
successful artist, and you know, so they are different. Um,
Good for our lamb.
yeah, right. And I would say honorary goes to Slim because he was awesome and he did deal with a lot. And when I saw the replacements, I never saw them with Bob. I only saw them in the Slim era, and he was great every time. You know, I also saw them with that final drummer, Steve Foley, who was in the band for 7 months. You
He
know,
died.
he
He
did.
died
He
in
died in like 2009. Yeah, 8 or 9.
What
And
was it? Yeah.
2008 or 9 or something. Yeah.
Oh,
What did
yeah.
he die of?
He OD'd.
Yeah.
Oh,
He
shit.
he never really, I mean, they have a quote in there that he never really recovered from his 7 months in the replacements. Like that's all it was. What one word would you describe each member? Let's stick with the original 4 again.
Okay.
Just Paul, Tommy, Chris, and Bob.
I can go. You want me to
Okay.
Yeah, you go. You
Go
go.
ahead.
Okay, so I would say Bob, sadly, death wish. Tommy, I don't like him. I don't know why. Tommy, not likable, 2 words. Okay, Paul, Chris is the lamb.
Okay.
Paul is the brilliant bully.
He's the wolf.
Yeah,
Ooh.
he's the
Right.
wolf. Yeah, Paul's the wolf. Those are my words. Tommy, a disappointment. Though he did go play with Guns N' Roses, right? He played with
I've had the most interaction with him personally, and he's always very, very nice. He's grown up
Oh,
and he's
good.
matured, and
good.
he's not
Okay,
the
I'm
asshole
sorry,
that he
Mom.
was at that time. But yeah, when he was in the band, yeah, he was kind of a cocky dick, you know.
Okay. He's
So
no
you-
Vince Neil.
No.
No one is Vince
No,
Neil.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one's as bad as Vince.
Vince is the lowest of the low.
Absolutely.
In case it wasn't clear in the Motley Crue video, he sucks.
Yeah, he sucks.
Terrible.
He's the worst.
Bob, tragic. Paul, genius. He's difficult and an asshole. He is a fucking genius. I love that music. And he was mean to me personally. 35 years ago, I got over it. It's like, I love the music so much. I'm not going to let it affect me. I don't care. Right.
Bad boyfriend. Bad boyfriend.
Exactly.
Right there.
Tommy, he was the spirit of the band. I don't know, spirit, I don't know. I guess I don't have a good word for that one. And Chris, he's the survivor. He came out fully intact. No damage to Chris Mars. The rest of them are all slightly damaged. So I would say maybe undamaged. I don't know.
Dave, I'm starting to feel like you cheated off of me because
Uh-oh.
my word for Bob was tragic.
Okay.
My word for Paul was genius.
I don't care that.
And I was going to get really freaked out if you had my other 2. but this is where I diverge. Chris, I had artist.
That's good. I'm down with that. That's a good one.
And Tommy, I had snarky.
Mm-hmm. That he was.
Yeah.
He was.
Yep. Or shithead. But then I felt like that was maybe a little bit too harsh.
I used to.
Especially since he was a kid, you know. So snarky. Was snarky.
Who do we think is the ultimate survivor of the story of the replacements? I kind of said I revealed mine a little bit and said Chris, because Chris Mars ended his term in the replacements in a very negative way. He was obviously very angry for a long time because if you listen to his first solo albums, a lot of the songs are clearly knocks on his former bandmates, but he ended up becoming a very successful artist to the point where when the band got back together, he didn't need it. He didn't want to do it. He was like, that's my past, you know? And Paul Westerberg says something like he looks at us like we were his kindergarten class. Like that was, you know, just something he did when he was younger. It's their life, you know. Chris has a whole other existence outside of it, where when you see Tommy, You see Paul Westerberg, the first thing you think of is The Replacements.
You look like a Paul that used to be in a good band around here.
Yeah, that would be me.
Chris might exist in a whole other world where that's not the same, where that's not the case. So I say he's the ultimate survivor.
Well, and I love that because the way that Paul Westerberg totally dissed him in that interview, saying that his skills were limited, it's like, oh yeah, it's like a hold my beer moment.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Agreed. I had a list of survivors.
Okay, who are your ultimate survivors?
Okay, Carlene, but she really didn't have a choice. The CC Club, because that's been there for, I don't know, 70, 80, 60 years in Minneapolis. I've been there. They're probably like, who's the Springsteen girl that walked in? Like, I'm again, my little preppy bag. So yeah, I mean, that was probably an issue. But at the end of the day, the survivor to me is Michael Stipe.
Yes.
Because he's spending his millions and millions of dollars and a stress-free existence, just loving life. He doesn't have to worry about it.
All of that rivalry bullshit and all of his, everything that was so directed at him by this band never even touched him. He kept going.
He was probably blissfully unaware of all of it.
Yeah,
I mean, didn't
or
care.
If he was aware of it, he laughed his way to the bank.
He absolutely did. He absolutely did.
So my ultimate survivor of this book is Michael Stipe.
Listen, I'm with you on that 100%. So I interpreted this time Survivor a little bit differently in terms of like not ultimate success, not like ultimate outcome, but who tried to survive the most.
Okay.
So my runners up, Pete Jesperson, definitely, like, he went through a lot with that band and he persevered and he's still alive, and that's a win.
And they're all friends now. They're all back to being friends
now. Yeah. It's like he got engaged to the boyfriend.
For now.
Anita, man, she went through so much, losing her son and taking over care of her grandson and going through shitty husband after shitty fucking husband. And, knowing that Tommy's dad abused her kids, and I came away with feeling like she just tried as hard as she could and had a lot of love in her heart. And so she gets an honorary survivor.
Absolutely.
For that.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
And then honestly, my number one, which is completely counterintuitive, is Bob. I mean, even though the book starts with his death, and even though he fucked up so many things, again, to deal with the trauma that he had in his life and his mental illness, the fact that he was able to found this absolutely incredible band and be in it for 5 years at least, and to really make such a huge mark on the music industry, despite everything that he struggled with. I just feel like some people maybe would look at him as a loser, and I look at him as a fighter. And so to me, that's survival skills. I think he did his best, and so he wins Survivor for me.
That's awesome. Shelley, you're like the heart of the book club.
Who do you think had the harshest firing? Bob's firing, Peter Jesperson, or Chris Mars? I think Bob got off the easiest. It was a phone call from Westerberg telling him, and they had a little heart-to-heart, and it sucked for him. But in terms of the way they treated him, it wasn't a dickish move. They were dicks to Peter, and they were dicks to Chris Mars, no doubt. I don't know who's harsher, Peter.
Bob is the harshest because he's Tommy's brother, in terms of just like looking at it overall. But Chris probably had the harshest just in terms of how it went down.
Yeah. Because he read he had kind of decided to put aside all of the slights, all of the, you're making an album where I'm only on like 2 songs and you're calling it The Replacements. He put aside all of that, and he was trying again to like re-show how committed he is. And then he reads that article where Westerberg just shits on him in print and is just like, you either fucking call that guy and get that thing retracted, apologize to me, or I'm out. And they were just like, yeah, fuck you. You know, we're not going to apologize. All it would have taken was, you know what? I was in a bad mood. I was blaming you for stuff. I'm sorry, dude. And it would have been over. But they're just, again, they're constitutionally unable to do the right thing in some instances. And that was another one, because that was just shitty what they did. And Chris was not the problem. The drumming is not so complicated that they couldn't have had Chris do it. It's like he just didn't like Chris at that point. He didn't want to hear any back talk. He got to the point where Bob was the resistance to what Paul wanted to do and to moving on into a different type of thing. They got rid of Bob. Now, Chris was resistance to what he was doing, to this new type of music that he didn't like. And so let's get rid of Chris. Like, but you get rid of these guys and it didn't solve any of their problems at all.
No.
So maybe I'm thinking Chris's was probably the harshest.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jen?
I'm with you.
Yeah. Chris?
I mean, Jesperson probably got some fuel out of it. Like, okay, this is it. This is the big breakup. Like, you're done. Okay. I'm going to go home and like Delta Dawn, wait for you to call me every day. In waves with that, literally, because I had to drive to St. Louis and back. So I listened to this book the whole way down and the whole way home. And I still had
Bless you.
another 10 hours. Look at that. But with that aside, I think I really struggle with that. And then I put on that playlist. I'm like, these guys are so good. Like, those songs are so good. Like, when you hear them, you literally tune in and stop. I don't care if it's a song I've heard 100 times. Alex Chilton, Skyway. I mean, Way to the Sky. I mean, they're so good. So to answer your question, yes, they're that good.
Yeah.
Yep. Same here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd absolutely still like them. Now, if Paul Westerberg had done to me what he did to you, maybe
might have been different.
If we started out of the gate with him being a complete asshole to me, maybe not, but otherwise I would still love their music.
Yeah, I was a fan first, and I knew some of what was going on with the Replacements. I mean, again, it was mostly about them being drunk and funny. Like when they appeared on MTV and they had shaved their eyebrows, and everyone was looking at them like, what's wrong with them? And then they finally said, it's because we shaved our eyebrows. And then I think it was Slim or Chris Mars said, when you shave your eyebrows, people think your IQ just dropped like about 40 points. You look dumber. And
it did.
They did look dumber. They looked ridiculous.
Okay. Hey, let me ask you, were you a fan of the Replacements before they went out with Petty?
Yes.
Okay.
I got into them in probably 86, 87 in high school. And I didn't even see them with Tom Petty, but I did see them when the incident with me and Westerberg happened. That was May of 89. And then they did that Petty tour right after that. So it was probably June or July of that summer. So yeah, beforehand for sure. Yeah.
They disrespected Petty.
Yeah.
I mean, they're trying to get a big break. Tom Petty's going to bring you on the road. And
I think that just showed they were not able to be successful. That was an amazing opportunity, playing in front of 15,000 people every night. If they had done a tight set, like of just songs off those last 3 albums or whatever it was, off of Pleased to Meet Me, Don't Tell a Soul, and Tim, and they just rolled out there and played a 40-minute set of hits, who knows what could have happened, but it wasn't in their DNA. They just weren't going to do it.
Wasn't. That's why they didn't want to be successful.
Right. They sacrificed the whole thing. They raided Petty's wife's wardrobe and went out there in her clothes.
She didn't care,
though. She didn't care, you know? And that's the thing. I don't think Tom Petty was even pissed about it. Like, he thought it was funny. You know what I mean? Like, he did. it was the fans that didn't like it. Tom Petty's fans thought, who the fuck are these idiots, up on the stage? Why are they acting so stupid? But I think Petty Benmont Tench played on the next Replacements album after that. So clearly he didn't have a problem,
Yeah.
I think the audience didn't understand that the Replacements were like, had a genetic predisposition to just be fuck ups.
And they probably played like shit.
Oh, yeah.
It's like if you don't have an understanding of like what their deal is, it's like, they're going to suck.
It was too alternative for a Petty audience for that. And I get that. I mean, it's too much for me.
They talked about in the book the next year they did an opening slot for Elvis Costello, and it wasn't a train wreck. They thought, it was still the same kind of a deal, but they actually tried to play a set and just be a rock band. It didn't necessarily work for them, but it wasn't as much of a train wreck because maybe Costello's audience was a little bit more receptive to what they were doing. Maybe. I don't know.
And they're fucking good.
Yeah.
Mention of Tom Petty made me think to reference your text messages on our RBC group text. Can I just read like a couple of things that you sent to us? Because it fucking cracks me up so hard. These guys are pigs, honestly. Fuckers. Disrespect Petty? Seriously. Watching SNL video. Jesus. I hate these fuckers.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a good one.
Random thoughts.
I'm like, yep. Need a minute, guys. I have to say that I'm severely disappointed in myself. And this minute is going to be about one of the biggest missteps I have made in my musical life. And that is that I never listened to the Replacements until we read this book.
Oof.
What was I doing? Where was I? Where were they in my life?
Because you like good music too.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What happened? What happened? I don't know how I missed these guys. I'm obsessed with them. Like, I'd be listening to the book and be like, I actually just want to listen to the playlist. And it's not knocking the book, but I just love them. And listening to them, first of all, I'm a huge Big Star fan. Had no idea the connection there. It's like any band that loves Alex Chilton and writes a fucking awesome song titled Alex Chilton should be in my repertoire. Absolutely. And what was surprising to me was that there were several moments when I was like, oh man, Jeff Tweedy was totally influenced by the Replacements. There's so many like just little moments where I was like, if you tell me
the Goo Goo Dolls wouldn't exist without the Replacements. They stole their whole sound.
Oh, so I never listened to them. So
you're not missing much. I didn't really like them. But anyway, sorry, side note.
Well, I'm glad I don't have to take another minute to say that I should have listened to the Goo Goo Dolls.
No. You're good. They're just fine. I met them. I have a picture of myself with them. I'll send it to you.
I saw them open for the Replacements 2 nights in a row in 1991.
Really?
The Goo Goo Dolls were the opening act. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And like Paul Westerberg is such a freaking genius. Like the way that he writes lyrics, it's like so good and perfect that it seems so natural that it seems like it would be easy to write that. You know what I mean? Like it just fits so well that it's like, oh yeah, anybody could write that, but they cannot, like, how old are you? How old am I? Let's count the rings around my eyes. Oh my God. I mean, just brilliant. And like Skyway, I just got goosebumps song. Just saying the name of that song.
They're so good. Go listen to the Love Untold.
Yes.
Solo stuff. That song, you're going to text me and be like, oh.
That's my next step is like, now I need to listen to Paul Westerberg solo.
Yeah, he's a real genius. And I love how in a lot of ways he would write about the band, sometimes very directly, like Tommy gets his tonsils out. That's a direct, this is about Tommy. And then other times it was more subtle and you didn't necessarily know that it was specifically about them, but he could also sum up their personas. He has this on the very first album on Shut Up, where he's like, Tommy's too young, Bobby's too drunk, I can only sing one note, Chris needs a watch to keep time. There's all of their reputations in like 10 seconds of song. He got it there. And he was 19 when he wrote that stuff. Like,
Bagging on Chris then. He's
the
already
genius is overwhelming. That and the sarcasm. I mean, the funniest line in the entire book is when Paul was being critical of Chris Mars's wife towards the end of the book, and he said, "It's as if Yoko married Ringo." That was the funniest fucking line in the entire book. I couldn't believe that was so great.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That's my minute, is that I'm ashamed of myself. I promised to work on this and get better. And I would like to be a survivor.
Well, as far as post replacement stuff go, not to plug my own stuff again, but I did do a long 2-part video called After the Replacements, and it goes into all of the recordings of all of the members post replacements, all of Tommy's stuff, Slim, Chris, Paul, Bob, Steve Foley didn't really do much, but beyond, I got all the other guys in there. There is I'll link to that below as well. But if you want to really do a deep dive into their post career stuff, there's a video for that too.
I know we're going real long here, but I do want to shout out Gary in this book from Gary and the Boners. I mean, and then there's another Gary
that was manager, Gary Habib.
Yeah, he didn't last long though, did he?
He lasted maybe 3-4 years.
Yeah. Okay. Remember when they were all sleeping somewhere and like, in the Waltons form, good night, John Boy, all that stuff. He'd be like, good night, fuckers. Like, it's so good. Gary and the word fuck need to go together every book from now on.
Yeah, so right.
Gary and the Boners.
We need a Gary in every book. There has to be
in the Boners. Yeah. So we had Gary, fuck you, Gary, in the last book from the Lanigan. Okay. And I want to give out the first Patty Hearst Award. We're going to try to give this out as much as possible going forth. Patty Hearst was an heiress. She was kidnapped by a terror organization. Google it to find out more on your own. And it's basically Stockholm Syndrome, where you become prisoner to, you're a prisoner to your capturer, but you start to be a part of their organization. You kind of give in to what the cause is. And the first award ever goes to Peter Jesperson, because he could not get enough of these guys. Anytime he tried to get out, he was brought right back in, as we've discussed and covered. But yeah, my Patty Hearst Award goes to Jesperson.
And I question, do we feel like, to go with the bad boyfriend analogy, might we say he was dickmatized?
Sure?
A little bit.
I mean, come on.
I'm with you 100%, Jen.
For those
congratulations, Pete.
Peter Jesperson did publish his own book last year.
Is it good?
Oh.
I haven't read it yet. I just bought a copy at the end of the year. And as far as I know, it's not on audiobook at this point, but this could be a future book for us. But Tommy,
after a long break,
who mockingly fired him, is one of the blurbs on the back, as well as Peter Buck from R.E.M. Just FYI. So Peter Jesperson did come out the other end. Okay. He's got his own book now, and he survived.
I hope he found love.
I think he did, actually. I think he did.
Good.
Because there's an epilogue to the book. It was published in 2016, and it does touch that the Replacements did reunite in 2012 to do some shows. It was under the catalyst of Slim had a series of strokes and had a lot of medical bills and was in all this different care. And so to raise money, the Replacements decided to get back together and do this thing called the Songs for Slim. And it raised a couple $100,000. And that ultimately proved the catalyst to, hey, let's try to do a tour. They did shows in 2013, 2014, and 2012, 2013, 2014. Over the course of that time, They did get back together. Chris did not want to participate. They asked Chris. He said no. It's not because he held any ill will about it, but again, the replacements for him were the rearview mirror, and he just didn't have any interest. And he did.
Sorry, guys, I'm being a successful artist right now.
He did do a song on here, one of the Slim songs, called Radio Hookward Hit, which is a cover of Slim that Chris did by himself and contributed to that. So he still participated, but he didn't want to do the reunion. I saw the reunion twice. It was only Paul and Tommy and some other guys. Josh Freese, who's the current drummer for the Foo Fighters, was the drummer. But, you know, whatever. All of the guys have done some incredible solo work. Chris Mars has done a number of solo albums, including one in 2023, just last year. And he also has a dog charity called Mutt Mutt Engine, where he raises money for dog rescues in Minneapolis. And all the money from his albums, which he mostly just sells on his website, all the money all goes towards this dog rescue thing that he does. So he's very involved in that. Of course, you got Paul. This is the album with Love Untold, by the way, eventually. Okay. Slim had 2 solo albums. This is both of them on one. This was a Record Store Day thing a couple years ago. His 2 solo albums onto one thing. Tommy, in my opinion, had the best solo career of any of them. I love his music the best. He had this band Bash and Pop. He was in a band called Perfect. He's done some solo records. He played in Guns N' Roses for a long time. He did a huge career. He's great. He's still out there today. He has a new group called Cowboys in the Campfire. I saw them last year. Bob, who was working with a band called the Bleeding Hearts before he died, and that album never got released. It finally did see the light of day in 2022. And there's Bob, right there. It finally came out on a Record Store Day limited edition thing. So at least Bob got his day on that record. He is featured right there.
Okay, I'm in search of some books on these 3 topics. Metallica. Do you have one, Dave? I think a Metallica book would be great.
There's probably one.
And like the documentaries where like they go to rehab and all that stuff. I think that's incredible. I think we should find a Metallica book. I want a really good R.E.M. book, because, you know, you go through all these books and you search for a book and you're like, was this written, you know, in the back room somewhere, put together by AI? Or, you know what I mean? I think we need to really, really get some opinions on that. I also, I'm wanting to do like a Manson 60. I'm really not like that into serial killers. I just think it's really like a fascinating time.
I'm not that into serial killers, guys.
And just some, you know, there's some Beach Boy options when you kind of get into the whole Dennis Wilson.
Right.
And I don't know if that's something, it would really have to be really good for us to, and Brian Wilson is a genius, but I don't know. I don't want to read a lot
he's very interesting. I mean, I'm sure there's a good thing about him or the Beach Boys or something like that.
Yeah. So I'm in search of Metallica, R.E.M, and just a killer, no pun intended, late 60s California scene outside of like Laurel Canyon or, you know, Hotel California and some of those other that I've read. I just want something that is really, really juicy.
Yes.
All right. So put your recommendations.
I'd like to add one onto that while we're on the topic. If there's any music, true crime crossover books, I'm a true crime junkie. I admit it, and that would be sweet.
Manson would come in there too.
I wonder, because I don't know about just Manson, but I was going to say there's a couple of rock stars, R&B stars, who have died under mysterious circumstances. I mean, first of all, Marvin Gaye killed by his stepdad.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true crime or not, but I mean, that is sort of weird family drama. He was murdered by a family member. Maybe there's something there with Marvin Gaye. I don't know. Month, our book is going to be Rebel Girl by Kathleen Hanna, the one-time leader of the band Bikini Kill, a punk rock revolutionary from the 90s. She's also done the bands La Tigra and Julie Ruin, which started off as her solo, but then it kind of became a band. And Bikini Kill is back with a current tour that's going on at this moment. I did see Bikini Kill, so I have a story for when we do that particular book. I'll
Okay,
relay
and
that.
this was my pick.
It was?
I don't know much about her at all. And so I'm excited to get into it. There's some NPR stories about her. Just give a Google. It's a very new, present, current book. So I'm excited to read that. I'm also excited to bring some, female energy into the club because we've been covering a lot of dudes lately.
Yeah,
And
we started off and it was a lot of women, and then we switched, and now we've been all testosterone
Yes,
and men for the last couple of
estrogen
books.
around.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's going to be exciting.
I'm really excited to read that. I listened to the Fresh Air interview with her and it was fantastic. And yeah, I absolutely can't wait to dig into it. It's going to be great, I think.
Again, I do have a playlist of other replacements videos if you're interested. If you want to see about my infamous story with my incident with Paul Westerberg, it's in there in one of the videos. And of course the playlists and stuff. So hope everybody dug this one. This is a lot of book, but I do have to say that I think Bob Mehr did a good job because he really got this level of detail that nobody's ever done with the replacements, interviewing sisters and girlfriends and ex-wives and people they went to high school with and shit like that. Like, these people have probably never been talked to about their interactions with the replacements, and this thing, there's no detail, no stone left unturned in that book.
It is the Replacements Bible.
Oh yeah.
Yes, it is. And I will say, there was a lot of redundancy in there for me, but that's the replacements.
Yes.
They're just
Because
always
each year they do the same thing. You think it's gonna
opportunity,
be
fuck it
different.
up. Opportunity, fuck it
getting
up.
drunk, pissing on a bus. I mean, you name it, tying someone up, that making someone walk around naked in the bar. He's also the survivor.
Cluck like a chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The author is a survivor too.
Yeah, he's an honorary survivor as well with the CC Club.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I feel like if you want to learn about the replacements, this is your book. And it is very well written. It's very, very
It is very well written.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. This is a good one, guys. Shout out to Gary and the Boners.
Yeah. Fuck you, Gary.
Good night, fuckers.
Yeah, good night.
Good night, fuckers.
Yeah, good night, fuckers.
Hey guys, like, subscribe, follow all the things.
Throw us suggestions as well.
We set up our social.
Our new social media stuff will be linked below.
Yep. So give us a follow. That'd be rad. Give us some follows and we'll start posting some stuff. It'll be cool. But yeah, thanks for watching. Appreciate it every time.
Thank you.
Adios.